Bond, gadgets, multiplayer, most of the things you need for a Bond game. And oh man, was this game good back then or what? Now, if you couldn't tell with all the hints already, this is a game based on that one legendary fictional character, the one and only
Bond. James Bond.
Now, during the late 90s and early 2000s, the Bond games had quickly escalated into becoming one of the most renowned game series at the time. But hey, if they kept making a bunch of crappy games like 007 Racing, iconic Bond titles you might know of like Nightfire or Everything or Nothing would have never even been made. And you know, it's a damn good thing they made this title Agent Under Fire, a classic FPS Bond title. I mean, the game was straight up just badass, with its sick gadgets, ultimate driving sections, intriguing cutscenes, and especially because you constantly kept hearing this every time you completed a task or even opened a secret door or some shit. But hopefully in this short 007 game review, you'll become a bit more interested with the James Bond game and film franchise, because they truly are something to appreciate, no matter which Bond we're talking about, you know? Now, I was gonna cosplay as James Bond with a suit and all, but unfortunately I don't have a suit or a green screen, which really blows. However, I absolutely admire James Bond, so there's an incredibly high chance I'll be looking like him in a future video. And besides, there's always an opportunity for things like that. Be sure to remember that there are bookmarks provided as usual if you care to skip somewhere at some point. So without any more stalling, watch the video, read the description down below, and check out the channel. Thanks. Now, with Bond being the hilariously cocky bastard that he is, the character in this game appears to be nearly identical to Sterling Archer from, well, Archer the TV series. And of course, the devs tried to make him look as close to Pierce Brosnan as possible, and well, we can tell they did an amazing job on that, huh? I mean, it's sort of like having 2 to 3 Bonds mixed into one, except in this case, he might just be the horniest Bond that we've ever seen, and it always seems like he's losing it every time there's a woman around him. His facial expressions and his side comments are just straight up hilarious. Now, the game was both published and developed by Electronic Arts, and was released in 2001 for the PlayStation 2, then again in the following year for the Xbox and the GameCube. Some players have said that, for its time, the graphics, aspects, and ideas for Agent Under Fire were exceptionally well, in which it sort of was. Excluding the minor scuffed parts, of course. Now, was the game's storyline argued to be a bit too short? You bet your ass. Now, was it enjoyable for the most part? Indeed it was, considering that it literally could have been completed in 3 to 4 hours. Now, obviously, almost every Bond game has had their problems, but I mean, let's be realistic here. Most of the games in the series were fun as hell, as long as we're not counting that Bond title that was practically a Call of Duty game. But like, even iconic games that certainly continue to have their fair share of opinions, such as GoldenEye, were still very enjoyable. But my first introduction to the Bond series was the last game with Sean Connery, which was said to be one of the last exceptional James Bond games. Whether you like kick-ass driving missions, sneaking in events, or just blowing things up, this game has most of what a damn good Bond game needs. Now, depending on who you talk to, this game was treated with either incredible respect, or was seen as a bit of a short and ancient experience of a dog shit James Bond title. Although many would agree that Agent Under Fire is amongst some of the best 007 games in the entire franchise, which says a ton considering how many games there are. And having an original Bond story that seems right out of a blockbuster film, the game took its own path into having a completely unique storyline, unlike many of the previous Bond games, which were almost entirely based on the James Bond films of the same name. And in general, the game is primarily known for being a solid James Bond title, while holding many of the most thrilling driving sequences in the series. I mean, to me, the backseat shooting parts sort of reminded me of these 2 missions from Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb, which I totally admire. Honestly, check it out when you have a chance. It's a childhood favorite of mine. But yeah, like, the actual driving and steering sections in the game were just bizarre, besides shooting all the cars and helicopters and such, which, don't get me wrong, was still fun. I mean, there's quite literally a mission where you stroll down the streets of Romania in a tank and just start blasting everything.
Anyway, I started blasting. Bang! Bang!
Like, things just can't get more badass than that. Alright, let's be honest here. You just can't have an amazing James Bond title without it having a uniquely orchestrated storyline or even a damn good multiplayer experience. So I suppose I could elaborate Agent Under Fire's story and how it differed from the other games, or I can introduce you to exactly how enjoyable the multiplayer aspect of the game really was. I mean, first off, I'll put it to you this way. If you decide to boot this game up now, there's still an enemy bot waiting to match up against you, so I'd say that's pretty sad, but also also pretty sick, right? Many of the later Bond games have mostly always been known for their incredible multiplayer experiences. And the multiplayer has like, what, 11 maps? And this game was no joke. I mean, you just had a variety of intricate maps that were all somewhat enjoyable to play with your friends and whatnot. And the multiplayer mode can hold up to 4 players, in which you could also compete in numerous different arenas to hold battles in. I mean, I totally forgot to mention all the accessibility, customization, and friggin' mode options for all the maps and and all the various types of settings and modifiers for the multiplayer mode were just insane and could be transformed into some sort of FPS sandbox mode. Some maps even allowed you to go outside the map or even reach difficult areas with the grappling hook. So honestly, this aspect of the game was amazing for the time being, just playing with your friends, siblings, or whoever really. And of course it was no GoldenEye back then, but it was nonetheless still a fun, overlooked experience. If you've ever experienced any Bond game at all, I think many of us would agree that there's definitely been a few games where the controls and combat systems of the game were, well, either prehistoric or just straight up scuffed, you know? The game's controls were exceptional for the time, but like most FPS Bond games, it can take a few minutes to get used to the controls when aiming. But once players familiarize themselves with the basics, the experience was a smooth and enjoyable ride for most of the game. However, unlike the PlayStation 2, the controls have been said to be somewhat strange or interesting at first glance. But luckily, players could change the options for the controls. And seeing how Agent Under Fire features over 15 various types of firearms along with other forms of weaponry, the game also holds a multitude of some pretty sick gadgets that are used for a handful of situational purposes, all of which I'll get to in a minute. Now, Agent Under Fire's combat side of the game was just something different. Now, it wasn't necessarily good or bad. You gotta remember that this game came out for the 6th generation of consoles, and FPS games were becoming more popular at the time. And as I should have mentioned before, the game's development was a bit rocky, but it turned out alright, I'd say. And as with previous Bond entries, the game features an auto-aim system during combat, which some would argue was just straight up garbage, was sometimes scuffed or required some getting used to. Overall, many found the gunplay to be somewhat dull, but obviously it's all subjective. And I feel that the combat was great in various parts of the game, more specifically towards the multiplayer aspect of Agent Under Fire. However, there was a load of sections during the game where the combat just felt so prehistoric. I mean, seriously. And it goes the same with the game's occasional clunky controls at certain points. But not all Bond games can be perfect now, can they? Well, unless you're Nightfire, of course.
It's true.
Now, if it's one of the single greatest aspects about a Bond game, come on, it certainly has to be many of the game's creative and quite useful arsenal of gadgets. I mean, what's a Bond game without the use of his neat contraptions and his secret tools, right? Most of which, in-game, are concealed within a mobile device of some sort. The thing has lasers, a remote transmitter, and even a friggin' grappling hook, and it all just makes you feel like you're an actual secret agent or something. The point is, it's got every damn gadget 007 would ever need. The character is also provided with an electronic signal disruptor, along with Bond's iconic jetpack, known here as the Q-Jet, which was featured in other Bond games as well. That laser cutting tool I was talking about before can be used to cut open vents, doors, and just about anything. The awesome Q-Claw just allowed you to cling and fling to certain areas at any time, which was great. Along with the unique ability to take important photos with your camera device, and another useful gadget was Bond's pair of night vision goggles, which I feel is self-explanatory, although it does have a limited battery usage. Now, Bond's wide variety of different weapons is immense. I mean, yeah, you have all your spray and pray weapons, but most notably are the special ones like the dart gun, which had its moments of fun. And even the silenced pistol that's great to have around, especially that clean gold variant which everyone loves. The rocket launcher for numerous levels certainly had its moments, but honestly most of the other main weapons that are at Bond's disposal were fun to use, but not when they ran out of ammunition easily. And your ammo in missions wasn't that uncommon, however without even realizing it, you just seem to run out of it quite often, especially during the middle of a firefight, which sucks. But of course you can always switch to another weapon, which there was a ton of lying around. But honestly, the arsenal of weapons that are at Bond's disposal in this game was just such an enjoyable feature. As with all amazing James Bond titles, the moments and memories that we all have of them are just something special. Yeah, they might not be everyone's type of game, but hell, many of the Bond entries are just stunning, sometimes in more ways than one. And Agent Under Fire truly hints at a glimpse of how amazing and enjoyable first-person shooters were during that forthcoming era. It was simply one of many. Now sure, some may state that the game's length was short-lived, or the aiming/controls were just atrocious, but essentially players have compared this game's enjoyment near the top Bond entries that you might know of. But was this game considered amazing? Hell no, certainly not. I just did it for clickbait, man. But nah, I'm just kidding. In many players' eyes, this James Bond entry was exceptional during that period of video games. But when I recently got the chance to play it, I'd say it was just phenomenal. Now, if you couldn't tell with all the Nintendo-related content, this technically is my first non-Nintendo-related video, so I suppose this sort of marks a stepping stone for me of some sort. And it's not an exaggeration. I absolutely love the process of this video, even though it took way longer than I hoped. And I mean way longer.
Many months later.
But there's way more of this stuff to come. Speaking of, my next video might or might not end up being Nintendo-based, which will be an outstanding project I'll be working on. So as per usual, if you enjoyed anything at all during this video, check out the rest of the content I have and all that, or even sub to the channel, maybe? But yeah, like always, I honestly hope you enjoyed this special landmark of a video, and yeah, until next time, peace!